Hello, welcome to the Daily Defender. Great to be with everybody again. Real quick, I had a buddy comment on my intro video and stated that probably it's best that I continue to explain why my face is blurred on at least the first few videos so people become accustomed with it, or maybe all my videos. But real quick, it's simply that I'm a civilian and that I'm in a white collar job, and I just want to be able to protect my identity, my family's identity, if you will, so I can express my views with my original content on my channel. So with that out of the way, as I mentioned in the intro video, I'm a huge fan of Smith & Wesson, just enamored with what Smith & Wesson has been able to do and what they've done over the years, really from, 1852 all the way up through current state. Me personally, my interest and hobby level seems to kind of go from the inception of 1852, probably through the mid 2000s, 2005, 2010. I'm not as connected with the newer product, although I can certainly see the channel going there. I do have a few M&P pistols, semi-automatics that I own, and I do have some of the more current generation revolvers as well. But the general part of my interest lies in the call it the 1852 to the 2010 range of what they were able to do. So, but with that said, I had again commented in the first video that I wanted to start with one of my next videos with a firearm for me that's just one of my personal favorites, and it's the Smith & Wesson 39, or in my case the 39-2, and it's behind us, so let's go ahead and grab it from the wall. And of course all these pistols are clear, but again, this is the pistol that we want to talk about today, and so without further ado, let's get right into the video.
This time we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart and absolutely just one of my favorite pistols of all time, and that's the Smith & Wesson first generation 39 or 39-2, and we'll talk through all that. But as usual, let's get our admin out of the way first. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button if you're liking the content, hit the bell so you're getting latest content, and as usual, and always comments. Love the comments. Really, for me, it's really one of the most important parts of our channel to hear from you folks and get feedback and input so we can continue to do content that we're all interested in and topics that we're all interested in. So comments are super important. Probably today, maybe more than any other time, in my opinion. I can think of other videos we're going to do down the road on other firearms, and while those comments will be important, I think this particular firearm, and hopefully some of our viewers are going to be able to comment because they've had direct or maybe some solid indirect contact with this pistol or people who used it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So with further ado, let's take a look at this pistol. We've got it kind of in an old, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and probably even maybe today, U.S. GI style leather holster, which I just thought had a great kind of throwback feel to it. And really, what we want to talk about is just the just unique nature of this pistol, but also the history of this pistol, the history within Smith & Wesson and within the U.S. and law enforcement and the military and at the Vietnam War. I don't know. I can't think of another firearm. And maybe I'm just blanking out, but I can't think of another firearm that has this kind of connection. Really, maybe a Glock. Maybe that whole rebirth there within Glock and striker fire and how that came together for law enforcement and military, etc. But and I guess 1911 as well, perhaps. But from a double action 9mm concept and I think how it came together, it has some really, really unique history. And I don't know, maybe some of that history is getting lost. I hope not. That's really the point of this video, quite frankly, is to get this information kind of back out there and stir some thoughts and memories, again, especially of people who utilized it or carried it or somehow were involved in it within law enforcement or the military or Smith & Wesson. That's really what, beyond my own passion for the firearm and Smith & Wesson as a company, I'm really hoping that we get some really neat people who see this video, or maybe if you see it and you know somebody who is specifically involved in it, maybe you can have them comment. We just really love to have that. I don't know if we get a really neat individual, maybe we'll even do some kind of podcast or something that would just blow me away as as the owner of the Daily Defender. That'd be great if we could take it that level. But getting into this pistol and why I think it's so unique in so many different ways, we've kind of got to go back in time a little bit. Not only is this pistol go back in time, but the concept that Smith & Wesson had and where this all developed. And I'm not trying to write a history book, so we're not going to get every notation right and every mile marker right. But effectively, my research and reading has come to the summary that basically at the end of World War II, maybe around 46 or so, the Department of Defense or U.S. Army wanted to review a semi-automatic 9mm pistol. And I think it came out of some other interest that they had seen with some other semi-automatic firearms, some exposure. And I think they wanted to explore that concept. And my understanding is fairly quickly, Smith & Wesson was able to produce a pistol for them to review. And maybe it even harks back to the model number 39. Maybe there's some connection back to Smith & Wesson even reviewing this pistol before World War II. But to kind of fast forward and speed up the story, the U.S. military reviews the pistol, but doesn't really adopt it. And I couldn't find an enormous information about truly why they didn't adopt it. Perhaps a lot of it has to do with the fact that they just had a ton of 1911s left over after World War II, and maybe in kind of a stroke of genius or level of intelligence, the Department of Defense says, "Hey, wait, we've got a ton of these 1911s and 45 ACP. We'll just stick with that." And so this design, this 39, doesn't actually go anywhere. But Smith & Wesson had a lot of time and effort invested in it, and so they didn't just let the project die, to their credit. And somewhere around mid-50s, I think 54, 55, they reintroduce it, or actually truly introduce it into the market as a known model. And again, from my research, it doesn't really take off, and I don't know if that's a function of the consumer, whether that was law enforcement or competitive shooter. I mean, really, concealed carry wasn't a thing back there, really. Just didn't connect with the pistol. I haven't been able to really find out, why that happened. But again, they have some sales. It's not that Smith & Wesson pulls the product a year later, but they introduce it, and again, to Smith & Wesson's credit, they stick with it. And then, but it again kind of lays dormant. It lays dormant for almost another decade, which is pretty amazing. And then something really, really kind of interesting happens, and it almost happens or does happen at the same time. It's there's kind of a level of kind of ironic that this happens at the same time. And what happens is that there's two stories here that again, like I said, are happening at the same time. The Illinois State Police and also what the U.S. Navy SEALs are looking for, what the Navy Special Warfare is looking for in a pistol in Vietnam. And so we have to kind of break this story up a little bit into two parts to kind of keep it straight. So the first part of the story is a little easier, and it's the adoption by the Illinois State Police. The Illinois State Police review this pistol from Smith & Wesson, and in 1967 decide that this is going to be their sidearm. It's the actual Model 39, and again, this is the model that Smith & Wesson has had out for about a decade now, and slightly different than this pistol, and we'll get into that in a minute. This is a 39-2. But the Illinois State Police adopt this firearm in 67. It doesn't officially get issued until 68. And they have Smith & Wesson and the Illinois State Police, from what I've been able to research, they had a very close relationship, kind of joined at the hip with this pistol. I think the Illinois State Police was kind of the real world or live R&D that Smith & Wesson maybe didn't have, and there was a lot of initial feedback from the Illinois State Police to Smith & Wesson about the 39. And again, from what I've been able to read and conclude, is that they found that the pistol, specifically the 39, had a much different extractor. This extractor here on the 39-2 is kind of this short, skinny, very typical of what you'd expect to see with an extractor. The 39 had a much longer, wider, fatter extractor, and from what I've read, they had problems with that. That was not up to what the Illinois State Police wanted. Additionally, the pistol sounded or appeared that it needed much more cleaning than maybe officers were accustomed to, or maybe coming out of revolvers, etc. But that's really more of a training and learning curve. But specifically with the pistol itself, this extractor was something that they felt needed to be changed. I think they actually had extractor failures. So fairly shortly thereafter, about 1971, the Smith & Wesson reintroduces the 39 as a 39-2, and this is exactly what we have here. And we'll get to this specific pistol in a minute. But the Illinois State Police then utilized the 39-2, and they have a very long relationship with Smith & Wesson. It actually goes decades. It goes the 70s, the 80s, and then the 90s until it finally gets to the early 2000s, when most law enforcement organizations move over to striker fired, and Glock really becomes the premier, or the most common firearm that law enforcement officers are putting into their duty holsters. So, but the Illinois State Police stick with and work with Smith & Wesson for decades. And through the 70s, they utilized the first generation pistols. I know for a fact in the 80s they moved to the second generation pistols, the 439 specifically, the 459, 469, and then they do migrate and move to the third generation pistols in the 90s, the 5904 and 6904 respectively, and then finally, like I said, move into Glock. In terms of cartridge use by the Illinois State Police, you kind of have to go back and imagine, what it was like in the 60s and 70s. There was not all of this 9mm technology and hollow point technology that we have today. So they're utilizing, 125 grain Winchester, 95 grain Federal. In the 80s, they're using the 115 silver tip. I believe it was Winchester, which of course has this, connection back to the FBI shooting in the 80s down in Miami, as does Smith & Wesson. As we know, that's a whole nother story of the Smith & Wesson chapter. Not only were Smith & Wesson pistols employed, the 459, I believe it was, that one agent had that was utilizing the Winchester 115 silver tip ammunition, but also then where Smith & Wesson goes after that. And that's another story for another day. But so that's the connection with the Illinois State Police. So that's happening. And so let's come back again to the late 60s. At the same time, this 67, 68, 70 time frame, the U.S. Navy decides that they're interested in a semi-automatic 9mm suppressed pistol. And Smith & Wesson and the Navy start talking, and what effectively happens is the very iconic Hushpuppy pistol. And that's part of the fascination with this firearm. Not only do I personally think this firearm is absolutely gorgeous, I think it looks the way a semi-automatic pistol should look, and we'll get into that when we talk about this pistol. But the fascination with then what the Navy does with Smith & Wesson and how they then employ the Hushpuppy moving forward into Vietnam. And really my first connection with this pistol and this whole Vietnam Hushpuppy thing, I have to give credit to the Squadron Signal publication and the authors, which we have, Leroy Thompson and Ken Maxwan and Kevin Warnke. This for me as I don't want to say a child, or childhood, but in my teenage years, getting this book. My father and I, outside of Chicago, used to go to a hobby shop, and we'd look at dioramas and build things, and they always had these Squadron Signal publications, and even though he was a teacher, he always had time and money for me and my little interests. And so this is a book that I've had since my teenage years, and I've fallen in love in the fascination, really, of this image that they did. Just an amazing image of this Navy SEAL, probably in the Mekong Delta, rising up out of this river in his tiger stripes to take a shot with this Hushpuppy pistol. It's just it was just one of these images that just kind of works and sticks with you, and develops a fascination, actually, on a number of different historical topics. But this book is amazing. I absolutely love it. Thank you again for the authors of putting it together. It made an impact on me. I believe it's out of print, and I think you can still find it on eBay, maybe some other online sources, old bookstores, what have you. If you have the opportunity to pick one up, by all means, do. And actually, the Squadron Signal publications in general, they just put out great books, or publications. It's really not a book. But this particular book is amazing. Goes through all kinds of very, very interesting things with Mac v SOG, or Mac v SOG in Vietnam, and Marine Recon, etc. Just a wonderful book. But that really, I have to give some credit to that book, because it really sparked at a young age an interest in what the SEALs were doing in Vietnam, and this particular pistol. So to get down to that, to kind of finish off that story, the Navy, the SEALs, and the UDT teams have a requirement for this pistol, but it's going to have to be a very specialized pistol. And effectively, what they did to this pistol is design it to shoot suppressed in a very unique manner. And we have to also bring another contact, or another name, into this discussion, and that's a gentleman by the name of Dwayne Sharon. And Dwayne Sharon is kind of, as I understand it, pretty much of an icon, or was, within Smith&Wesson. And Dwayne started at Smith&Wesson at a very young age, World War II, then went to Korea, then came back, and then worked in, I guess, engineering, R&D. I'm not sure exactly what they were called, product development, whatever the terminologies were back then. And I guess made a name for himself, and then I don't know the whole history. Just picked up on bits and pieces, but he becomes involved with the Navy SEALs in the late '60s and this project. And I don't know if Dwayne Sharon is the sole author of the Hushpuppy pistol per se, but his fingerprints are certainly all over that design from what I understand. In fact, there was you'd call it a podcast, I guess, today, but effectively it was just a recorded interview with him, and I guess his son eventually got a hold of the recording and re-released it. I don't know all the details on that, but if you can find it and listen to it, he talks about flying out to California and working with the SEALs, and I think he mentions the pistol once, and then the interviewer asks him again about it, and then all of a sudden he's, I'm not comfortable talking about it anymore. So I don't remember what year that was that interview took place, but maybe he was still under some kind of top secret security clearance and couldn't talk about it, but he was obviously very respectful of what had done. So. But again, just to kind of finish off that part of the story, the SEALs and UDTs want this suppressed pistol, and Dwayne goes ahead and starts, probably with other Smith&Wesson team members, designs this pistol in order to operate in that function. And they basically, effectively called it a Mark 22 Mod 0, and that was the pistol. I think the suppressor was the Mark III suppressor, and then when you combine the two, it was a Mark 23 Mod 0. But effectively what they had done, they had modified the pistol primarily on the slide. So the slide stop or slide catch release, whatever term you want to use, was not this style this style. It was a bigger, broader. It was different. It basically locked the slide in place. It kind of looked like it had a toggle almost to it, and that was effectively so when the pistol was fired, the slide would not cycle, and you would not have the mechanical metal noise, etc., of the cycle of the slide. So it was a manual operation. It was a one-shot fire. You would then have the ability to change the slide stop and rack the slide and put another round in. The other thing, the pistol did not have wood grips from what I've read. They were black plastic, very similar to what you'll find on the 59, and we'll talk about that in a second. It also had obviously an extended barrel, I think inch or inch and a half, because it had to accept the suppressor. And then it had specialized sights because obviously you needed to see over the suppressor. So, and then special ammunition. So that was a company by the name of Supervel. And I don't know if Supervel was the sole like designer of the cartridge, or but they definitely were the producers of it. I think they were based in Indiana at that time, and it was 150 grain 9mm subsonic round that they made. And so there was this whole package, there was this whole concept built around this pistol, from the pistol to the suppressor, and how that all had to function in a wet environment with the SEALs, the ammunition, and this whole package that the SEALs got. It's very difficult to find a picture with the SEALs. There's a lot of material in print about the Hushpuppy, but actually finding a picture is very, very difficult. The closest I've gotten, I found one on Pinterest. It was a series of images by Life magazine, and I don't know, that can show a picture on here and get in some kind of copyright, so we won't do that. But you can probably find it if you do enough searching. SEALs in Vietnam, Life magazine, etc., etc. And there's a series of images, and it's from that time frame. Like, I can't remember exactly. I want to say from a 67 to 71 or late 60s. It's in that correct time frame that the SEALs would have had this pistol. And there's several pictures of these guys with that same holster that I started the video with, and a 39. And if you put the two images side by side, and I know we don't have the image here, but if the image was here and we're looking at it, you can see in the holster the curved back strap, the wood, so we'll come back to that, the wood grip, the Smith & Wesson medallion, the flat base plate, and the lanyard loop. So from all, and there's and seems to be a flat piece here. The image is not perfect from the 60s, as you can imagine, but it certainly appears to be a 39. Now, it is probably a 39 and probably not a Hushpuppy. It's also very difficult to say in the image. Did every single Hushpuppy only have the black plastic grips? I don't know if anybody knows. Supposedly, that's from what I've read and looking at secondary and tertiary articles and going back and forth and really trying to match up correct data, and other people using other accurate data, it doesn't seem like they would have used wood grips for the Hushpuppy. So it's very probable that the SEALs, or maybe it was a UDT team, was simply issued the 39 and had them. But it's really one of the only images I've ever been able to find of a SEAL physically carrying what appears to be the Smith & Wesson 39-2, and what that means for Vietnam. So just an amazing pistol. Obviously, we don't have a Hushpuppy here. That would be just amazing. But the closest I've been able to get is a 39-2. And like we talked about, the 39-2 came out in 1971 after that Illinois State Police connection with Smith & Wesson. And the pistol does gain more and more popularity. More and more departments use it. The other part of this first generation series with Smith & Wesson is it's not only the 39, but also the 59. And there's still a connection back to the SEALs on that as well. This too starts to get a little gray. There were some reports that Smith&Wesson, that the Hushpuppy was always a 59. That doesn't seem to be the case. From images and other research, it appears to have always been a 39-2 actually. And again, not that maybe some guys didn't have 39s, but it seemed to appear to be a 39-2, and it was always the single stack magazine. The 39 and 39-2 is normally an 8-round magazine. I've read two different things. One, that the SEALs had a 7-round magazine, that it wasn't actually 8. And I've also read that it was an 8-round magazine, but they only loaded 7. So I don't know, things get pretty fuzzy back then in the 60s. And of course, if it was a top secret program, it gets even more fuzzy. But so that's the 39 was the single stack 9mm 8-round. Let's call it 8-round. But there was a discussion with Smith&Wesson and the Navy and the SEALs about a double stack version, and that's effectively what the Smith&Wesson produced with the 59. The 59 is its sister, and they're really identical pistols, as I understand it, from a lot of the components, the internals, or all of the internals, minus when you get to the plastic grip. And here's that plastic grip that I was talking about that many reports have, that the Hushpuppy was, had this style grip, obviously still with a hump, and a 14-round magazine. And that's really the only difference between the two pistols. And I believe, if I remember right, there was discussion, or there were reports that, the SEALs were looking at this as well, and maybe have even used it. I don't think it was ever actually a Hushpuppy pistol. I think the Hushpuppy was always a 39-2. Here again, this would be great where the comments would come into play. People that were there, were involved in the project, family members, etc. It would be great to have your comments and feedback and dialogue back and forth on just some amazing American history. So the pistol itself, just to kind of grind down to that, like I said, this is mine. This is a 39-2. This is a pistol with a manufacturer date of about 77 or 78. The 39s, or 39-2s, if you will, were really produced from, 1954, when they introduced the 39, when they ceased production as the 39-2 in 82. And that would make sense, because the 80s obviously then carried on with the second generation Smiths autos, and the 90s would have carried on with the third generation. So that's the kind of the era that this pistol is part of, and I think it's really cool that it's a mid 70s or late 70s pistol. And if we kind of walk around it like we always do, or we like to do, we'll take a look at this. And of course, all these pistols have been safety checked prior to the video, but we can certainly do that again to make sure everybody's comfortable. But this, like I said, this particular pistol is mine. And if we kind of walk around and look at it, we start off with the slide. It's a steel slide, alloy frame, 9mm, of course, 4-inch barrel. And the slide is really well done. I mean, again, to me, it looks like a semi-automatic pistol should look. And if you kind of walk around it, it's got this flat matte black at the top and down on the first portion of the slide, which reduces glare, it's just a nice touch. It's pretty cool. The sight is definitely a fixed sight, because it's part of the slide, which is kind of neat. And then if you look back towards the rear sight, it's certainly adjustable, but it's pretty unique. It almost has like a revolver kind of feel. I don't know the history on that particular sight and how they got there. They continued that with the 59, and then abandoned it for the second generation pistols and got down to a closer 3-dot sight. But and then we have Smith&Wesson stamped on the side, the traditional made in the USA, Springfield, Mass, all of that. We've got rear serrations on the back on both sides. We have a single decocker safety, and we'll talk about how that works. It's not ambi. And we've already talked about the smaller extractor for the 39-2. And of course, we've got a beautiful stamp or engraving of the Smith & Wesson logo. Working kind of down through the rest of the pistol, it's an alloy slide, alloy frame, as I said, and it does have a barrel bushing, so it harks back to again a 1911 kind of feel. So it's not put together like a 1911, if you will, but you can tell the era that this was designed and conceived in. And then you have these very beautiful walnut wood grips or panels. Smith & Wesson generally uses the term stocks with their revolvers. They don't use the term grip, and they really kind of don't even use it when you get to the semi-autos until you get to the third generation. I believe the correct term is wood panels. Maybe the term grip was used. These are in really good shape, in my opinion. My particular example has kind of this odd stain right here, but beyond that, the grips are in very nice shape. The pistol is in excellent shape, in my opinion, for its age. The bluing, it is a blue gun, but as you can, it really, to me, it comes off more black than blue. It's got a beautiful high gloss, almost elegant kind of finish to it. It doesn't necessarily have that, to me, that beautiful midnight blue that the Smith & Wesson revolvers have. But in the correct light, you can kind of pick up the blue. But to kind of the straight eye or just looking at it, it always looks a little black to me. Nice beaver tail. I've got some checkering here. Nothing on the front strap. Flat base plate, and of course the lanyard ring like we talked about. Very nice pistol. The functionality of it is, of course, a double action, single action, and this was the original concept back in the 40s. And if you're not familiar with that, effectively, you would load the pistol and chamber around, and the pistol would be in this configuration, and it has what is termed a decocker safety, and you would point the pistol in a safe direction and drop the decocker, and it would automatically drop the hammer in a very safe manner. And so now you could carry the pistol in this configuration. In fact, I had a very short stint in law enforcement, and I carried a 5904 off duty, and this is exactly how we carried the pistol, how we carried the Smith. Certainly, you could carry it in the safe fashion, or maybe there was a department policy that required that or what have you, but generally speaking, how we did it and what I've read, this was the standard configuration. The first shot, of course, is going to be the classic long double action pull. It is long, but it's very smooth. It's just a nice double action. It's right, comes through right kind of where you want it to be. Actually better than some of the second generation Smiths that I have, actually, but not as good as the third gen. And then the pistol would be in single action. Every shot after the first would be in this configuration. And then your take-up is very short and a very nice break. And the reset is extremely short and tactical. You feel it, you hear it, it's excellent. Generally speaking, that's true of almost all the semi-auto Smiths, and then the pistol breaks again. So it's if you're like double action, single action, all metal guns, this is just a really fine piece of engineering and manufacturing in classic Smith & Wesson, methodology. The other interesting thing about this pistol, as all the Smith & Wesson semi-autos have, it has a magazine disconnect. And what that basically means is when the magazine is out of the pistol, it's inoperable. And I don't know if the Illinois State Police had any part in that. I would assume not, because again, the pistol was designed in the 40s, introduced in the 50s, but it was probably geared for law enforcement, or the thinking was, given Smith & Wesson's large connection to law enforcement and their revolver sales. And the thought was that if an officer was in a struggle for his firearm and thought he was going to lose control of the firearm, he could drop the magazine out, and then the gun would be inoperable. The other thought, or I seem to recall, and again, unless my memory's failing me, but I seem to recall back in the 90s that the other functionality of that was that if your partner was hostage, or you're taken hostage, or there was a hostage and you were forced to give up the firearm, you could drop the mag, toss the pistol, or hand it, and most likely they wouldn't understand. It would be inoperable. There are stories, and I think they're from the state police, specifically from troopers, that their life was saved because of that. So it's an interesting feature. There's obviously pros and cons to it, but it is part of the Smith & Wesson design, and it flows through all 3 generations of the Smith & Wesson pistols. So I think that's probably most of what I wanted to tell you about the pistol and its connection. It, like I said, I think it's just got an amazing piece of history within the U.S. It's woven into the fabric of law enforcement. It's woven into the fabric of what the Navy SEALs did in Vietnam. It's a beautiful pistol. It's very functional. I enjoy shooting it. Just because of its age and kind of, how I want it to continue to look, I wouldn't carry it. But if you told me this was the only firearm I could carry, then we'd load her up and carry her, and that would work fine for me. So that's what I wanted to talk about today with this pistol. Like I said, it's one of my absolute favorite firearms for a whole host of reasons. Love the history, love the connection back to different stories. And again, if we could get comments about the pistol and people who were involved in it, used it, associated with it, again, at a law enforcement, military, Vietnam, or Smith & Wesson level, it would be great. I'd really like to proliferate and continue talking about these pistols and Smith & Wesson and the history, and making sure these pistols don't kind of just fade away. We'll do another video on we'll do many more videos on Smith & Wesson pistols, and semi-auto specifically, because they've got a near and dear place in my heart for these pistols. So thank you for watching. Thanks for spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed it, and can't wait to see the comments. See you next time.